Okay, I will try and read from the Grandma's Attic Stories again. This chapter is called Grandma's Mistake. It was time for school to start, and my new plaid dress hung on the door, ready for the big day. That dress reminds me of my school days when I was about your age, said Grandma. Only mine was wool and had long sleeves. Here's a piece of it in the quilt. And Grandma pointed to a plaid square in the quilt folded across my bed. You didn't have just one school dress, did you, Grandma? I asked. No, said Grandma. I had three that year, as I remember. We wore pinafores over our dresses then, so we didn't need as many, but I did like that red plaid dress. Did you like school when you were little, Grandma? I asked. Oh, yes, Grandma replied. I couldn't wait to get to school. It did start out as a big disappointment, though, Grandma laughed and picked up her mending beside the rocker. I could see a story coming, so I pulled up my little chair and sat down. Ma had taught me my letters and how to sound out a few words before I started school, Grandma began. I was so anxious to read that I would sit with the boys' school books and try to pick out words I knew. I think the whole family was glad when I was finally old enough to go to school and they weren't being pestered to tell me what the words were. The little school we went to was a one-room school that had all 8 grades together. Sometimes there would only be 1 or 2 children in a grade. The beginners sat in the front, and each grade was arranged in order with the big boys and girls in the back. The classes came to the benches around the blackboard to recite. I had a seat with my special friend Sarah Jane in the beginner's row. We did our letters and numbers together and also spent a lot of time listening to the other boys and girls as they would come to the front. One day, while the second reader class was reciting, the teacher called on Billy to read a sentence from the board. Billy was older than the others in his class because he had repeated the first grade. We children thought he was just dumb, but that wasn't the reason. He had been sick most of the winter and missed a lot of school. Of course, Billy was embarrassed about being the biggest in his class. He stood to read the sentence, but he didn't know all the words. Since I had been listening to the class, I read it for him. Billy sat down, red-faced and unhappy. The older children tittered. I felt rather proud of myself for having known more than Billy did. And even when the teacher said, "That's fine, Mabel, but you finished your letters now," I still felt a little bigger than the other beginners. My pride was not to last long, however. Reuben reported what had happened to Ma. "Mabel is acting too smart in school, Ma," he said. "She made Billy feel like a fool today. She acts like she knows it all." I tossed my head defiantly. "Well, I did know the words, and Billy didn't," I said proudly. "Reuben is right, Mabel," said Ma. "You've no business showing off in front of the school. You made Billy feel bad by reading for him." I hung my head. I hadn't thought I was doing anything wrong. "After this," said Ma, "you are not to speak up, even if you do know the answer. It's not ladylike to act so smart. Do you understand?" I nodded my head. I understood that if I knew something, I was to keep it to myself. I also understood that Reuben and Roy would be watching out for me, and any slip would be reported to Ma. The teacher boarded around at different homes during the school year. Her first place was the minister's home. Toward the middle of the first term, she happened to remark to the minister's wife, "I thought Mabel Odell was going to be a bright student, but I guess I was mistaken. She doesn't say anything at all in school. When I call on her, she just shakes her head and ducks behind her book. I can't understand it." Ma couldn't understand it either. When this news was passed on to her, she had heard me reading my book at home, and the boys drilled me on my sums until I knew them well. She approached the subject at supper time. "Mabel, are you having trouble at school?" she asked. "No, Ma," I replied. "I get along fine." "Can you read your lessons every day?" "Sure, Ma, I can read the whole book." Ma was puzzled. "Then why," she asked, "does the teacher say you don't recite in school?" I was surprised. "Why, Ma," I answered, "you told me not to." "I told you not to?" Ma exclaimed. "Why, Mabel, I did no such thing." Yes, Ma, you did," I said. "You told me not to speak up even when I knew the answer. Don't you remember?" Ma remembered. Even though she was annoyed with me for not knowing the difference between reciting for myself or for someone else, she had to laugh. The matter was soon straightened out, and my schoolwork improved. If it hadn't been for the minister's wife, school would have been a big disappointment for me.